For those that don't know me, my name is Brian Watson, and I'm the founder of the Opportunity Coalition. We also acquired the building that you're in. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Innovation Pavilion, it's been a very exciting story here. Over 80 companies have been founded here in the last year and a half. The youngest entrepreneur is in grade school, and the oldest is in his 80s, and everything in between. And a lot of new jobs and opportunity are being created at this building. So I want to thank the Innovation Pavilion for allowing us to be here. I also want to thank Christina Whalen with Academy Mortgage, who's out there in the front, and Millie Kitchen, who's there, and she's with JP Morgan Chase, and thank you for helping us out. And also Elle for getting all the drinks and food, so thank you very much. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to share some thoughts. Nations around the world are under tremendous pressure these days. For those of us who follow the news, it's easy to worry when we see large regions of the world truly struggling. Terrorists and war in the Middle East, Russia threatening and bombing the border of Ukraine, and Ebola in Africa. Actually, Ebola in the United States that we're studying right now. Let's bring it a little closer to home. These are major issues that threaten the stability of the world. And they are complex issues that impact our daily lives. We have to face the fact that these issues are a threat for us here in the United States as we are part of the global community. That instability and violence could reach us here if we do not take action. It makes this time when leaders need to step up and provide a clear, positive vision for the future. People are longing for leaders to address the uncertainty in our world. Think for a moment about the void of true leadership out there. Not leadership that's focused on an individual and their political career or advancement, but true, sacrificial leadership that serves humanity. That said, have you considered that you might have a leadership role to play? Each of you in this room. Leadership can take many forms. Yes, it can be an elected official or appointed individual with a title as president, governor, mayor, ambassador. For us, though, it can also be leadership in our industries and local communities. When we provide leadership in these areas, we bring the innovation and advances that can be part of the global solution. For sure, what is happening with America's energy industry is a great example of that. We have been using hydraulic fracturing to drill for oil and gas for decades. Every day, people in the energy industry apply their expertise and creativity to make that process safer, cleaner, and more efficient. Some of it is our amazing ability to see a better way, to continually innovate. Some of it is our ability to apply new technologies, often from one industry to another. Wherever it comes from, the result is that our ability to produce reliable, abundant natural gas has become a strength and an opportunity. If we do this right, we can play an important leadership role in the world on this big important issue of energy. Colorado is uniquely blessed in this area. For one thing, we have massive potential for natural gas production, and we also have a talented group of energy professionals and entrepreneurs in the region. People who have the skills, drive, and experience to produce energy for us and for our friends around the world. Their work has been transformative. In the way that the iPhone has transformed the way we use phones and computers, fracking today has created an energy boom that is creating jobs, bringing revenue into our communities, and supplying energy. That is a powerful combination and something that we should celebrate. Let me say that again. It's a powerful combination, and it's something we should celebrate. That is the thing about innovation. Once the human mind has envisioned something new, there's no going back. And that's a problem for people like Vladimir Putin and potentially Mr. Jared Polis. The Ukrainians have tasted freedom from Russia and are fighting to keep that freedom. If they and others across Europe can get their energy from the US, they have a chance to break away from a totalitarian regime. The same holds for Mr. Polis. His desire to protect his personal property, his private ranch, should not trump the job opportunities and economic benefits that a strong energy industry offers all of Colorado, regardless of their economic status. We can provide natural gas to the world, creating jobs here at home and energy security for ourselves and our friends. I'm particularly pleased to welcome John Harpole today to share his thoughts on these important and wide-ranging issues. I'm sure he will agree. We look to our elected officials for some solutions, but I know solutions to much of the unrest in our world today is coming from people like us who are leading within our industries and within our communities. A little bit about John. He is the founder and president of Mercator Energy, a natural gas services, brokerage, and research company representing both producers and end users. Mercator also conducts special research projects for client groups, exploring the impact of industry trends on various regional markets. Mr. Harpole is a frequent speaker on natural gas pricing, transportation issues, and liquefied natural gas imports. John is a board member of the Independent Petroleum Association of Mountain States and chair of the Natural Gas Transportation and Markets Committee, board member of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association and Energy Outreach Colorado. John has provided testimony to the House Energy Resources Committee and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on natural gas issues and is qualified as an expert witness in a number of venues. John and his wife Lisa are also currently co-chairs of the Board of Trustees for Seeds of Hope. The mission of the Seeds of Hope Charitable Trust is to make the tremendous benefits of Catholic education available to Denver's children living in economically disadvantaged areas. With that, help me welcome Mr. Harpole.
Thank you very much. I am stunned that there are this many people here tonight. I've got to confess, I come from a large family of 9 kids in East Denver, Congress Park. I was the 8th kid out of 9. And quite honestly, anytime someone asks me to speak, I'm not used to people wanting to hear what I have to say, so I always say yes. But I've got to share one particular story with you about fracking. As a board member of Colorado Oil and Gas Association, we were all asked, about a year ago to start speaking at every possible venue to let people know what the true story was about hydraulic fracturing. And I was at a Rotary Club in northern Colorado, I won't tell you which city, and I explained to the crowd beforehand, I said, no, I'm going to go through a lot of technical issues. If you have any questions, stop me, raise your hand, and I'll try to do my best to clear things up. So I started off and I said, you've got to understand the technical prowess of our industry now. We can drill down 2 miles through the ground, take a right-hand turn, and drill 2 miles through a formation that may be no thicker than this room is tall, and we're so accurate we can hit a target the size of a refrigerator. Well, in the back of the crowd, this hand goes up, and I looked back, and it looked like a woman that had personally been to Woodstock, so you get the idea. And she said, "You're burying refrigerators underground?" And the entire crowd was just immediately uncomfortable, and so I leaned into the microphone. This is the part you're not going to believe. You can't make this stuff up. I leaned into the microphone and I said, "That's a metaphor." And she responded with, "I don't care what brand of refrigerator it is." It's very difficult to move on. So I was one of those, okay, next slide. So let's go to the next slide. There we go. Thank you. And again, if you do have questions, if I use some jargon that doesn't make sense, please stop me. Please raise your hand. We're going to be talking about a lot of units of measurement, and I'll kind of go through that in a minute. But one unit of measurement is the wealthiest man in the world. And he's not even a sheik. $70 billion is the guesstimate on what his net worth is. It's been a hobby of mine to follow Vladimir Putin over the last 20 years, and really what Gazprom, the company, the oil and gas company, the gas company really that the Kremlin owns 51% interest in, what Gazprom has done over the years to kind of project power throughout the former Soviet Union. And I'll go into that in depth. this is a presentation. There was actually supposed to be a picture. Oh, I went the wrong way here, so do it this way. Picture Mr. Polis sold his company a few years ago for $700 million. Net worth is expected to be somewhere near $200 million right now. And this is a person, quite honestly, that doesn't need to raise money in the sense that a lot of politicians do. He can self-fund his campaigns, and he's certainly done that repeatedly. So for the sake of trying to draw a large crowd, I thought I would compare and contrast the politics of both of these folks, but they're really rooted in the story of what we call the Shale Revolution in the U.S. I was just fortunate enough to go to Ireland with my wife and 3 kids. And again, diesel is in liters per gallon, but I did the conversion, and I was paying about $8 a gallon for diesel over there. My cousins in Ireland thought that that was at least 50 to 60% of that was taxes, but consider what we pay here. Very similar in terms of scope and size and ratio when you talk about natural gas as well. But here's the story. I was born and raised here in Denver, went to University of Colorado, worked for an oil and gas company that was owned by General Electric. Started with them in 1981. In 1987, I was put in charge of buying natural gas for all the GE industrial plants in the U.S. Prior to college, I'd only been on an airplane twice. The next 5 years after I accepted that position within the company, I was flying 150,000 miles a year. Most of my GE industrial plants were east of the Mississippi, and at the time, in 1987 and 1992, our really only true option for buying natural gas for those facilities was to go down to the Gulf Coast, offshore, near onshore, and pipe that gas several hundred miles to the northeast to all our facilities. I look at this map now, and you see this area in the northeast called the Marcellus Shale Play. It extends over, people argue, between 9 to 11 different states. That Marcellus Shale Play that ostensibly did not exist in 2007 now supplies 40% of the natural gas to the U.S. 40% of the natural gas to the U.S., and it is right under, what is terrific for the country, it is right under one of the most populated areas in the country with probably some of the best connectivity with respect to pipelines. But let's take a look at individually what it's done. Now I need to talk for a minute about terms of measurement. 1,000 cubic feet. 1,000 cubic feet is the amount of natural gas it would take to fill a room 10 by 10 by 10. 1 billion cubic feet is obviously much larger than that. 2 billion cubic feet is roughly what the entire state of Colorado would consume on a cold winter day, so 2 BCF. When you freeze natural gas, you reduce its size 600 times, so the volume of natural gas that would fit in a beach ball, when frozen, would fit in a ping pong ball. And as such, you can put 3 billion cubic feet of gas in a liquefied natural gas tanker and move it around the world. That volume, that 3 billion cubic feet of natural gas, is enough natural gas to heat 40,000 homes, 40 to 45,000 homes for a year. So today I'll be talking a lot about 3 BCF, cubic feet, that sort of thing. But the numbers here on the left are oil production numbers. The numbers on the right are really all new natural gas volumes off of shale plays here in the U.S. We produce as a country anywhere from 85 billion cubic feet of gas per day to 100 BCF per day. But look at how much of this is coming off of this horizontal shale, horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing effort that we've got underway in these shale plays across the country. The names, you may have heard of some of these, but Marcellus, Eagleford, Haynesville, Barnett, they may not mean much to you, but it means thousands, tens of thousands of jobs in this industry. Since 2008, we've seen a 38% increase in the number of jobs, direct jobs in the oil and gas industry. And so these are very meaningful numbers for us. Now I'm going to dial back, we're going to go back to the past and jump forward to the future, but this slide will help us kind of cheat our way through this presentation right now. Look back in the area between 2005 and 2010, before the shale gas green curve starts, and consider where we were at that point in time. I mean, it was stunning. I was very concerned about our position for energy on natural gas, having been in that part of the business at that point in time for 25 years. And I quite honestly, I cannot believe what's happened since 2008. And the rest of this presentation is to try to show you the depth of that story and really what it means for our country. But what's interesting, and if I could have been in any one location in the last 20 years, I wish I could have been in the room when a petroleum engineer had to explain hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, and what it meant to the U.S. to Vladimir Putin. Because you look at our curve for production in the blue and the value of Gazprom shares and see how they're inverted there. They literally, Gazprom planned to control the price of natural gas throughout the world, and I'll kind of backfill that claim and present it to you. So you talked about vision, and I'm not suggesting that I had vision, but it's something I've been watching since 2009. So the next few slides are a presentation that I gave 5 years ago. And I really only wish that as a politic, as a government, we understood back then what was happening, what was about to happen. I think the world might be in an even different position than it is right now, and certainly the Ukraine and Eastern Europe could have been. So, presentation I gave to Club 20 in April of 2009 on Russia, rig count, Rockies gas, and renewables. This slide is one that still holds true. This was a slide done by a group based out of Paris that ostensibly the bottom line tag is the critical part, and that is 90% of the growth in energy demand between now and 2030 will be met by fossil fuels. I get furious when I'm at a cocktail party and I hear people say, you know, we just need to get rid of all fossil fuels and rely on wind energy. What happened to our common sense? Would you ever promise your kids or grandkids that you go fly a kite next weekend? Wind is not dispatchable. Would you ever promise your daughter perfect weather for her wedding or outdoor reception? You wouldn't. Now, they're important resources, but they're not dispatchable, and the world will run on these resources. Take a look at world population growth and consider how much it's grown since you were born. And consider that 90% of the energy to fire that world is going to have to come from fossil fuels. This is a slide that I've been using literally. I've used it in almost every presentation since 2008. And it's a series of silos. The front silo is 1950, the back silo is 2050, with countries obviously run left to right. But look at just the population growth in India and China between what we've seen already and what we expect to see between now and 2050. I've been to China a total of a month in the last 3 years. I've been hired by PetroChina to explain to the people, some members of the Central Party Pricing Committee, and to employees of PetroChina, how we deregulated natural gas transportation here in the U.S. and how that's opened up so many possibilities for the country. There's a gentleman who's actually coming to Denver this Sunday with 5 executives. Joji Bin, he's the CFO for PetroChina, and he's written 2 books. Unfortunately, they're only both in Mandarin, about how they need to mimic what the United States has done. I'm going to steal some of my own thunder here right now. So in the last 10 years, we have drilled 140,000 horizontal shale hydraulically fractured wells. And you notice all the qualifiers. We've gone down, drilled horizontally, 140,000. When I left China 2 years ago today, they had drilled 26 against our 140,000. The country manager for one U.S. company that had a concession over there told me at a dinner, he said, John, the last time we drilled a well here and fracked it, every frack truck in Asia was on location. So I came back, called a friend of mine who's number 2 at Halliburton. I said, Jim, how many individual fracks could we pull off in North America on any given day? They can do 1 in all of Asia. And he said, John, I don't know. Let me get back to you. I called Schlumberger also. They both came back with a number somewhere between 250 to 350 individual fracks on wells in North America. And that infrastructure, that investment, that ability, that entrepreneurship is really what makes a difference here. But the other key that we have here in the U.S. is private property mineral ownership that's unique to the U.S. Of the 30 some odd wells that this one company, U.S. company, had, natural gas wells in China, they could not access 8 of their wells because they were concerned, the authorities were, about a peasant uprising. None of the local Chinese had any interest in those wells. They didn't have a royalty interest in those like we do here. But I would tell you right now, we would not have seen this shale revolution in the U.S. if not for private property ownership and the arm's length transactions that occurred between hundreds of entrepreneurial companies and those private property owners. So again, something unique to us, something very difficult to tell and describe to a crowd of 200 folks from China. One of my favorite memories, though, was I was using Friedrich Hayek quotes, one that I'll paraphrase, in front of 200 communist Chinese, and it said basically, it's far better for the million decisions of a marketplace to occur than a handful of men to determine the future of a decision. And when I put that slide up, I kid you not, after it was translated, there was just a murmur through the entire classroom. A murmur that lasted 20 seconds. That was one of those, for those people, I mean it, was an aha moment. And it was one of those, about halfway through it, I thought, should I run now or should I stay? But it turned out to be a good murmur. So another slide that I've used and overused from April of 2009, it really pretty much holds true, and that's the correlation between quality of life and electricity consumption. And on this curve, consider where Canada and the US are located versus India and China. 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion people in China, 300 million that they guess don't even have electricity. I have a hard time telling those people how to generate electricity when it comes to quality of life, something that we all take for granted. But consider how much those countries would like to move up that scale. So I have to pick on Nancy Pelosi. I love to pick on Nancy Pelosi. This is in 2009, but ostensibly she said on 3 different occasions within 2 minutes on Meet the Press that it's time for us to move away from fossil fuels and move towards natural gas. She was not the person asking the question about the metaphor in the back of the room before, but it's really a concern of mine when you have politicians that really don't understand. And so to expect them to have the vision for what a lot of folks in our industry understood 5 years ago is probably too great an expectation. So again, 2009, who owned and controlled natural gas? The top 3 owners of natural gas reserves at the time were Russia, Iran, and Qatar. Okay, that's really the only important message on this slide. They controlled the game. They controlled LNG exports. They controlled supply to all the former Soviet countries. They controlled supply to Asia. Would you like to negotiate your natural gas price with him? Since 1990, they've interrupted natural gas supplies 55 times. Now, you guys, you got to realize this was written 5 years before they invaded the Crimea. 5 years. Okay? 5 years ago, they were hoping to build the Nord Stream pipeline through the Baltic Sea rather than through the Baltic onshore, and the South Stream pipeline through the Black Sea rather than through the Ukraine. Quite simply because those former Soviet pipelines that were now owned by those new countries, Ukraine, imagine the other countries, when they didn't like their natural gas price, the gas that was headed for Western Europe would simply be siphoned off. Ukraine actually admitted 2 years after they did it, back in 2009, that they siphoned off over 2 to 3 billion cubic feet of natural gas, which is not a nice thing to do considering they didn't pay for it, which was even more troublesome for Western Europe and even more difficult for Gazprom to promise secure deliveries. And so this South Stream project that is a project underway, Nord Stream is done, is a project that if it were built on land from the Russia to Western Europe, it would cost about $3 to $4 billion. As it goes through the Black Sea, it'll cost about $14 to $15 billion. Now, when we deregulated natural gas here, the federal government basically said you cannot be a merchant of gas if you own pipelines. So if you own a pipeline, you own the pipeline. You just charge a fee to move gas through there. You cannot also sell that gas to parties. We're going to bifurcate that effort and make it competitive. A little known fact is that 30 days before Russia invaded the Ukraine, the European Union told them that on Nord Stream and the soon-to-be-built South Stream pipeline, Gazprom, you cannot own the pipeline and sell the gas. Okay? The South Stream pipeline also, 3 months before they invaded the Ukraine, guess what country received a bid and won the bid to supply $12 billion worth of steel for the South Stream pipeline? Germany. I am convinced, and we'll see this play out this winter, but I am convinced that this winter, when it becomes desperately cold in the Ukraine, that's when Mr. Putin will negotiate. And my sense is he'll negotiate for a permanent right-of-way for that pipeline through the Ukraine, because his natural gas cost on a $14 billion pipeline, his natural gas cost delivered to Europe may be 20 to 25% higher than if it went through land. And my suspicion is part of the settlement will be that Germany will run that pipeline right away. And that'll only be negotiated during the coldest days of December and January. Quite honestly, I think that's a settlement that'll go forward. Invite me back next spring and let's see if that projection's right. So really for Gazprom, for Vladimir Putin, for the $70 billion man, he sees energy as a weapon to regain his control over different states. Oftentimes we'll have these contracts. Nearly every supply contract expires on December 31st. Do you really want to be renegotiating your contract in the dead of winter? You don't. And oftentimes you'll say, look, we'll cut your gas price, but we have to own that pipeline that we used to own. And it's happened country after country after country, and I believe it's playing out here in the Ukraine. So again, back in 2009, and it's holding true, 70% of the natural gas that will go to Europe will probably come from Russia. The only real competition now is that because we're not importing the liquefied natural gas that we thought we would have to 5 years ago, right now, that gas is actually going to Western Europe. And it's created some additional competition for Gazprom supplies. But look at these numbers, and again, unfortunately, these numbers hold fairly true. That's the percentage of natural gas to those countries supplied by Gazprom and by Russia. And we'll jump to the next page. You'll see that Germany's even at 40%. German banks financed the Nord Stream pipeline that brought gas that's in service right now, that basically bypassed Poland and the Balkan states. This was a meeting that was held in 2009, and I've got to tell you, emotionally, this was the worst moment for me understanding gas in my career, when I saw these three figureheads, or these three folks, get together and announce they were forming a natural gas cartel. This is really before we completely understood hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. And I thought, my God, they are going to control the price of natural gas in the U.S. A year after this picture was taken, Gazprom was trying to hire 200 natural gas marketers in Houston and set up an office because they were convinced their liquefied natural gas tankers would be bringing in 20% of the natural gas we need here in the U.S. 20%. 20%. So let's tell you how they operate. And this is just, rather than read this, I'll tell you a quick story. They basically have taken over and reneged on all the contracts that were done after the fall of the Soviet Union. One of the biggest one was Sakhalin Island. Shell had spent $1.8 billion on an LNG export facility. Their equivalent of the EPA came in to Shell, Russia's did, and said, we really don't like your record of cleanliness, of operation, so we're going to take over. Gazprom's going to run this. It's going to be 51% owned by Gazprom. The day after they announced the takeover, Medvedev actually came out and said, you know what, all the environmental concerns have been rectified and cleared up. So 3 months after that, they went to this EPA, Russian EPA group, went to Irkutsk, Siberia. Irkutsk, Siberia is like Rangeley, Colorado. It is far out there. It's a oil and gas town. They met with a man named Enver Zaganshin, so think Denver without the D, Enver Zaganshin, on a Wednesday. And Enver Zaganshin was the representative from BP TNK, so British Petroleum. They had the rights to develop Kovietka gas field back then. And evidently something Mr. Zaganshin said upset them so much so that on Sunday night, the following 4 days later, his wife went out to find out why he hadn't come in from the sauna in the backyard. He had a bullet hole in the forehead and 2 in the chest. The only announcement you'll ever see on Enver Zaganshin's death was the announcement that BP put out that he died. The Russian press said, or the Russian police said, we'll do everything to investigate this. But nearly every European op-ed paper came out and said, this is BP's message to get out or renegotiate your contract. And so guess what? They renegotiated their contract. And guess what? Rather than run through each one of those, the $400 billion gas deal that was signed with China 3 weeks after Russia invaded the Crimea, this is a deal that had been percolating for 10 years. The Russians really understood how much they'd upset the world, or Europe, or Western Europe, or Eastern Europe. And so they really, I believe in my mind, thought it was time to sew up this $400 billion gas deal to take natural gas to China, something that BP was not planning to do. They were going to take the natural gas to other markets. So again, I don't mean to make light of Mr. Putin. I think he's one of the most frightening people on the planet right now, and his motives, for someone that's watched him for years, are, to me, very, very clear. This is the Kovietka gas field and how they'll move natural gas to China. This is a market, folks, that I think, had we been on the ball and had been approving liquefied natural gas terminal expansions and exports, if we had really understood as a country what we had in terms of resource base, that's a market that we could have acquired. And $400 billion is no small, loose amount of change. There are basically two markets for liquefied natural gas, the Pacific Basin and the Atlantic Basin. And ostensibly what the natural gas shale revolution in the U.S. has done is broken up the way you negotiate prices to sell natural gas in the Pacific Basin. Now in the Pacific Basin, when you sell natural gas abroad, you always tie it to an oil contract. What's happened now with the volume of gas we have in the U.S., we're tying it to the NYMEX natural gas contract in Louisiana when we sell natural gas overseas, when our industry does. And by disconnecting from that oil valuation, we have done wonders for Asia. Done wonders for Asia. And that's really honestly probably a whole nother presentation. But again, this was the sense. This is Alan Greenspan's quote in 2005 where he ostensibly said, we are going to have to import 20% of our natural gas because we don't have enough here. This was the conventional wisdom in 2008 that by 2020, 21% of the natural gas we consume here would have to come from abroad. And that was one of the marketplaces, obviously, for Mr. Putin's liquefied natural gas exports. This is the reality. This reality is such now that what we thought we'd have to import, we can probably export 2 to 3 times that volume. And I'll go a little bit deeper into it. But that is how this has turned since 2008. Something that no one forecast, no one understood. And it's all because of this great technological combination. Brian was correct. We've been fracking wells since 1947. We've been drilling horizontally since the mid-50s. But it's the combination of both of those into a shale formation that's changed what I only call our energy security here in the U.S. and something that I think we can project to other countries. Look at the volume of shale gas and that projection going forward. And look at the other categories of gas, tight gas sands, lower 48 onshore, offshore, and then coal bed methane gas. I cannot emphasize how important this is to our economy and to our future and really to our allies across the world. So let's go back to 2008. The Energy Information Administration, a kind of a pseudo-governmental group, came out and said, okay, you guys, you do have a breakthrough. We think you have about 347 trillion cubic feet of shale gas resource base. That number so angered a guy named Aubrey McClendon, a guy in our industry you probably heard about, that he went out and hired Navigant to come up with a number that was independent of the governmental analysis. So in 2008, Navigant came out with a number that was 840 TCF, and it only took about 3 years to the EIA to catch up to what the industry knew. Now in this number, this 1,073, the Potential Gas Committee, a group that's really organized and based out of Colorado School of Mines, they show 1,073 TCF. I've seen numbers from 2,500 TCF to 3,800 TCF. That 1,073 TCF number is one that doesn't even include one of the largest resource bases in the country that just happens to fall in western Colorado. Brian talked about the importance of our contribution from Colorado to the country. So I whipped through the Potential Gas Committee's report, and I don't see the Niobrara Shale in western Colorado in the Piceance Basin mentioned at all. So I called my two buddies who are in charge of it, and I said, you didn't mention the Niobrara Shale. You know, most of my clients think there's as much as 200 trillion cubic feet of gas in western Colorado in this Niobrara Shale. And all it will take is a price about 50 cents a unit higher than where we are right now. And the answer was, well, John, we just didn't have time to put it in there. It would exceed by an order of 10 what some of these other countries have. And so I would argue that that number you see from the Potential Gas Committee, that I've seen a number 2.5 and 3.5 times larger than that, is equivalent in mindset to what we saw from the EIA back in 2008. We are energy rich, yes.
So you're talking about moving gas from continent to continent.
Yes.
Are there transoceanic pipelines, or is this?
It's liquefied natural gas, all by LNG. 3 billion cubic feet at a time. So.
How fast does gas move through tanks?
It would take about from the west coast of the U.S. to China about 7 days. And we've seen the number of LNG tankers in operation increase by a factor of 3 in the last 10 years. Scheduled to increase probably twice beyond that.
Yeah, correct.
So.
Spain has 4 regasification facilities for gas that comes in as LNG proposed, and 1 natural gas pipeline.
That's exactly right. Thank you. Folks, when this, and I could go on for about 20 minutes, but let me just give you 2 minutes of this concept. So in Japan, South Korea, parts of coastal China, 98% of natural gas consumed comes in by boat. So again, Taiwan, coastal China, South Korea, and Japan. In Japan, the liquefied natural gas import facilities, they have 23. They have 8 just in Tokyo Harbor. 5 years ago, we had 5 here in the U.S. 5 import facilities, 2 of which were key ones up in the Northeast that were built in response to the 1973 oil embargo and just the crisis up there. And what's so stunning, that Marcellus shale play up in the Northeast has caused Cove Point, an LNG import facility, to reverse. They've applied to export gas 80 miles south of Washington, D.C. If you had told me that in 2008, I'd say you're insane. You know, this is the energy-starved Northeast. And now there's so much gas in Northeast Pennsylvania, where some pipeline capacity has not kept pace, that they're receiving a $2 discount to the Gulf Coast price in the energy high-demand area of the Northeast. I've got clients here in Denver that are getting a $2 discount to an area that historically has always enjoyed $1 plus. So it's hard. I get probably 15 publications a day that I sift through, and I'll print the page or two that I find interesting and put it in a pile to review again. That pile averaged over the years 2 or 3 inches. It's 1.5 feet deep right now, just trying to follow the developments in this industry. I was moderating a conference in Pittsburgh, a specific group on the Marcellus Shale, and I had 2 of my panelists argue whether or not there were 120,000 remaining locations in the Marcellus Shale play or 80,000, arguing over this. I'm doing my best to try to convey how stunning this is, but that's the reach of the Marcellus play. That's kind of the pipeline infrastructure network there, but most importantly, that is a population center of the U.S. You could not have found natural gas in a better spot for this country than you can imagine. So much so that, again, we're going to have to export it. This is blow you away. So the blue circles are roughly what we guess the reserves are for remaining reserves for natural gas in the world. Look at the U.S. number versus China, and then consider we've drilled 140,000 horizontal shale wells, and China's drilled, as of 2 years ago, they're only up to about 40 now, but as of 2 years ago, 26 against our 140,000. We have a level of energy security that no other country can kind of even compete or compare to. Look at the adjusted numbers. So from 2003 versus 2013, we've moved up to 4th, and again, I think that number is under. I think we're really 2nd. Yes.
And the reason for that is because of the no support by the farmers.
The no support from the farmers.
As far as the
China?
Yeah.
No, it's a pricing mechanism. The Central Party has 3 different pricing committees, and they don't allow a price that creates any incentive to go out and drill. And that's just one of the issues. So that's one of the things Mr. Joji Bin is trying to correct, is let that price float. So they subsidize all the gas purchases that they've got. They cut the price for residential, commercial. And the story is much deeper than that, but there's no market signal in their natural gas system at all that creates any kind of honesty or marketplace reality.
So what you're saying is that they did do the home drilling. They wouldn't have to be dependent on Russia.
Well, they should really invite in any country that wants to, or any company that wants to come in and drill. There's a gentleman over there who worked for IHS Energy, one of our Denver-based analytical company. Now, this really gets small world, but the translator that we had our first trip, Miss Cindy, was the number 3 person at PetroChina's secretary, and yet she had her doctorate in geology. And the number 3 guy at PetroChina really didn't like passwords and computers, so she handled all his work. So Miss Cindy was ostensibly the number 3 person at PetroChina. So the gentleman from IHS Energy was actually over this working with PetroChina to kind of show them to do research, that sort of thing. He got a hold of Miss Cindy's husband, the head geologist for PetroChina, his laptop, and downloaded all of the production information for China that was really at that point in time a closely guarded secret, and put it on the internet. He's now serving 8 years in prison. So I asked Miss Cindy in China, I said, why was that such a critical issue to you? She goes, Mr. John, we did not want other countries and other suppliers to recognize and know how desperate we were for natural gas and how low our production numbers were. You know, this is not an open society. I personally think they dial into their GDP numbers to make them look like whatever they want. So, again, we have found a natural gas and oil resource in a country that actually respects the rule of law and is open and honest about the numbers. So, Shale Revolution, can you imagine what he's going through? These are the existing LNG export facilities. These are facilities we'll probably export out of in time. There are right now 35 BCF of applications in front of our Department of Energy to export natural gas out of the U.S. Okay? That amounts to about 17 different projects. About 6 projects have been approved. In the last 18 months, our Department of Energy has changed the rules for the application process and the queue process 3 times. The most recent one was changed about 3 weeks after Russia invaded the Crimea. Now you tell me what message that sends our allies, that we're screwed up in terms of how we're going to license these export facilities. I mean, there's just no connectivity whatsoever in terms of what we could do, what we have, and what we should be doing for those foreign allies and people that could also be allies. Global picture, make a long story short, you don't have to read that all. There's a lot of competition for the demand increase that we see in liquefied natural gas imports. And I really think it's incumbent upon us, I just wrote an op-ed on this, for our country to understand that a lot of investors, a lot of entrepreneurs would like to capture as much of that export market as possible to keep and bring those jobs here to the U.S. And I just don't see this administration responding like they probably should. So, energy security for the U.S. I sit on the Energy Outreach Colorado Board, Low-Income Energy Assistance Board. I was, like I mentioned, one of 9 kids. My father died when I was 6. I was the 8th out of 9. My mom was 42 and she raised 9 kids by herself. And I still can't even comprehend that. So 15 years ago, I had to testify before the Colorado Public Utility Commission. And at Thanksgiving dinner, I went up to my mom. I said, "Mom, do you have any of your old utility bills?" Well, after dinner, she walks up with a shoebox and 32 years of utility bills that she had checked off the date she had sent the check, and she was writing in the margin the temperature and weather so she could anticipate what next month's bill might be like. Now, you guys know one of those bills was over $80. You sit there and you look at it, and so people say, "Well, John, aren't you worried about the cost to low income for prices to rise?" And I said, folks, we consume 26 TCF of gas per year. And look at the numbers, bottom line, that we think we have, 2,200 to 3,500 TCF. Think of the jobs that can be created if we have the leadership to understand that, yes, we have now produced a widget in the U.S. that the rest of the world wants. A widget that's cheaper, better, faster, smarter than anything we've come up with, and is a huge success. And yet, what do we see congressmen like Jared Polis carrying? A measure to stop that progress, because it doesn't agree with his sense of, I'm not sure what. We see an effort to try to take away what's been so critical in our growth, and that is the private property ownership rights of folks that own minerals, who may not own surface, but they own minerals. You know, that's what we can't lose track of. That's what's been lost track of, I think, in moving natural gas from Russia through Nord Stream pipeline, through the Baltic Sea, and then the South Stream pipeline. You can't let one person or one small group of people dictate the availability or the price to folks, because when you do, this is what you get. Now, you watch my prediction. I guarantee you a pipeline right-of-way for South Stream to move it onshore through the Ukraine will be one of the ideas thrown out by Russia when they're begging in the Ukraine for natural gas supplies, because they can't be met by liquefied natural gas terminals, because there are none in that part of the world, and you can't reverse gas flows from Western Europe to meet that kind of demand that Ukraine will see this winter. But I guarantee you that pipeline right-of-way will be thrown on the table. I really have watched this, so 3 weeks after, and this is going to infuriate you if you haven't thought about this yet. Putin presents a letter to all the leaders of the EU countries and say, Ukraine owes us $35 billion. Do you know where the $1 billion of initial aid from the U.S. to the Ukraine and the 17 to 18 billion from EU, do you know where those two funds of money went to? To pay down some of that debt. So the reward for Mr. Putin in invading the country was to have some of his debt paid down. Imagine that. Is that a disincentive or an incentive to continue to behave that way? The kind of economic terrorism, and this is, I think we should have taken Jared Polis's comments and his efforts to shut down fracking just head on. I think we should have made Jared Polis the enemy and not the large oil and gas companies versus the small ones versus Hickenlooper versus Beaupre or whatever. This is the nut, and he's a nut, you guys, because it would shut down the economic vitality of this state if he had succeeded. And it was done in such an insipid, creative way, in a sense that who could not be for local control? And who wants an oil and gas well within 2,000 feet of a school? The 2,000-foot or 2,500-foot offset for oil and gas wells would have shut down 80% of the locations remaining in Weld County. And this is a county that there will be at least $5 to $7 billion of investment in by oil and gas companies in each year for the next 5 years. And yet no one has taken him to task on that issue. Frank McNulty told me earlier this week that one of the reasons why Putin pulled his ballot initiative off the table was he simply didn't have enough signatures. And yet we equivocated and essentially didn't force it to go to the ballot. And I could go on and on and on about the relative politics there. But in my mind, this congressman, our congressman, is no better than the guy on the left side of this picture. That's concludes my official comments. Thank you.
I'm going to ask a few questions and we'll open up for the group. So my first question is that almost all of us believe we should be good stewards of the environment. After all, last time I checked, we only have one planet to live on. With that, how would you address the environmental concerns of fracking and dependency on fossil fuels, specifically within the United States?
I didn't ask him to ask this question, but I love this question. So two things. 5 years ago, Germany was beating us up for not signing off on the Kyoto Protocol. And there were targeted emission reduction standards in 2005, 6, and 7 on what the U.S. would have to do to reduce emissions. The shale gas revolution in the U.S. has caused fuel switching between natural gas and coal, and we are the only country that's met those standards. Germany has turned off all their nuclear plants. They're building 12,000 megawatts of coal-fired electric generation. To give you an idea, the coal plant that you see at York and I-25, the one that's closing down, Cherokee, is a 350 megawatt. Imagine 12,000 megawatts of new coal going in. You know, I've been in the industry for 33 years, and I've yet to meet one individual in our industry that didn't consider themselves an environmentalist. And I think what natural gas does in terms of reducing CO2, 50%, reducing sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, eliminating mercury emissions, is it's the golden solution to an energy question. And I'm very, very proud of our environmental record. I would tell you right now, I debated Amory Lovin's wife at the Denver Post, and we had 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. So my opening 3 minutes, I said, Hunter, if you can name one well in the United States that's fouled groundwater or an aquifer, I will cede my next 3 minutes to you. Just name one well. We drilled 140,000 horizontal shale wells, name one well. She couldn't do it. At the close, I said, now I will cede my 3 minutes of closing to you if you can name one human being that medical doctors have proven has been harmed by hydraulic fracturing fluid. Name one. She couldn't do it. If you want to understand the story of fracking, get the movie Frack Nation, and it'll help you tremendously.
In your speech, you mentioned that 90% of the growth in energy demand will be dependent upon fossil fuels. Do you believe we can exhaust these resources?
I answered the question on usage of natural gas. We think anywhere from 2,600 TCF to 3,580 TCF of reserves here in the U.S. Quite honestly, with and that's using current technology. I always qualify that. With so much of the technology we're using right now, we really didn't even completely understand and integrate 6 years ago. So I think that number is much higher. But so just do the math. We have at least 100 years of natural gas supply, and I think other energy sources will be discovered and used between now and then. So, no, I don't think we can exhaust it. We have over 250 years of coal deposits here in the U.S. Do you know our exports of coal to Western Europe, have gone up 150% in the last 2 years? This is the same Western Europe that endorsed and supported almost unilaterally the green campaign that they're rejecting right now. Our cost per kilowatt for electricity here in Colorado is about 7 cents a kW. In Norway right now, it's almost 38 cents. It's a nightmare over there, you guys, and I wish more people understood and knew it.
My last question, then we'll open up to the group. If you could make one or two major decisions or changes in the world,
King for the day.
King for the day.
King for the day.
I'll crown you. That would have the most positive impact for humanity. What would they be?
One or two changes. I would tell people under 30 to ask questions. I would tell people under 30 to ask questions. Don't just accept the pablum that's delivered to you. Always ask questions. Don't ever be afraid of being the one person in the room that doesn't understand or know, but dig and ask questions. I would tell reporters to ask questions so that the truth would be known, and so that folks, this is the energy breakthrough that we prayed for 20 years ago, and yet you have people putting out this noise about how harmful hydraulic fracturing is. But I think the only way to that truth is for everybody to ask hard questions. So that would be my request.
Great answers. With that, what questions do we have from the group?
You have to ask questions now.
Yes, Steve?
Thank you. I have just comment on this really short. So Obama kills the Keystone Pipeline, and in Colorado, last 2014 session, 2013 session, the Democrats passed legislation that it's a series over several years now. Basically, we're at a point where 20% of our energy has to come from renewable sources.
It's actually 30%.
It is
30%.
by 2020, and they denied the opportunity for natural gas to be included in those natural resources. And the way the question really is, are we exporting to Europe? Couldn't we just change the whole geopolitical equation, starting in Colorado?
My friend Christine talked about the RPS standard. In Oregon and Washington, they love renewables. Hydropower is not a renewable. They've deconstructed 350 dams in Oregon and Washington over the last 10 years. And water is not a renewable. There's such a sharp contrast here, and it's a great question, Christine, and this was not a layup or a gimme from Christine also, but consider what they do in China, how a small group of men decide what should be done in terms of energy, and then consider what worked here in the U.S., and that's that individual negotiation with private property owners. And I emphasize private property owners. We've seen production on onshore and offshore federal lands decline by 25 to 30% since this administration has been in place. The entire Shale Revolution breakthrough for the U.S. has happened because of private property ownership and all those individual decisions that can be made by those mineral owners and companies. And so for me, it's just, I ache when I see these mandated RPS standards where you're assuming and moving into the grid a resource that's not dispatchable, that is here and there and maybe not there. We did a study, you guys, and this will infuriate you. When you force the integration of wind energy in Colorado into the grid, you have to turn down a coal plant. That coal plant was meant to run 24/7, 80 miles an hour. So you switch off that coal plant, but guess what? You still have 8 hours of emissions. And the pollution control equipment, the hot side electrostatic precipitators, the baghouses, are not meant to be turned on and turned off. So their efficiency really calls into question, have you actually made any gain in reducing CO2? I will take anybody to dinner here, to any restaurant you want in Colorado, if you can produce to me a third-party peer-reviewed white paper that shows that wind energy reduces CO2. You will not find it. And yet we have legislators mandating it because they think they're controlling CO2. It's ridiculous. Ask questions.
Thanks.
I read an article a couple of months ago about some of the opportunities in the oil shale. Could you talk about
What was
that?
I couldn't hear the last part.
I read an article about the $20 trillion of oil shale they found in Cooper Pedy, Australia. Could you talk about some opportunities in oil shale and what that looks like in the markets?
I talk about energy on a shelf, and we have a lot of energy right now at $4 a unit for gas. We have an infinite amount of natural gas at $5. We have more than the world could need at $6. That kind of oil shale cost is up here. And so someday it'll be there, but it's not there right now. And the market forces that have worked out this shale revolution are the kind of forces I'd like to see us chase, and not some government entity saying we're going to give you a tax break so that you can create something that's not market competitive. Quite simply, folks, we would not have wind energy or solar energy in the U.S. without a tax credit. You wouldn't have it. So I don't think, again, a small group of people should be, and you could all chime in, the pickers, the people that pick winners and losers. It shouldn't be that way. It should be market forces.
Luke?
I'd like to ask the one kindergarten question, not being as...
It's a metaphor.
Okay. You said that when you freeze it, it's 600 times smaller. Your
Yes.
metaphor was awesome, from a beach ball
To a ping pong ball.
right. And then it's shipped.
It's shipped in a liquefied manner, and believe me, when it's shipped, they try to get it over there. Somebody asked how long does it take?
7 days.
Yeah, you try to get it over there as quick as you can.
Then the kindergarten question, the conjunction junction type of question would be, when it unfreezes, does it go back up to 600
Yes,
times?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's just frozen, it's down, and then when
Right.
it's and then
And if you remember the old radiators in an East Denver home, the old iron radiators, it's essentially run through a very large manifold like that to heat it back up. In the back. Yes.
John?
John, thanks for being here. I heard you at Hunter down at the Denver Post, and I wanted to hear you again. Can you tell us a little bit about the Colorado psychology of why we don't have an unabashed supporter of natural gas? I mean, the governor has done a fairly nice job supporting the industry, but a lot of his constituents not happy. And then we've already talked about Congress. But why do we not have some unabashed advocate for this? Well, you're doing a great job, but what's our thought process? I don't even mean in a partisan way. What's our cultural forming of why we're doing this?
We had, who's a gentleman from Texas that was pushing wind? I can't even think. Boone Pickens. So T. Boone spoke at the Colorado Oil and Gas Association 5 years ago. And my brother right now is mayor of Amarillo and knew him. So I was asked to ask the opening question of Boone Pickens. And so I went up to him and I said, again, to me, the wind energy thing, that made no sense whatsoever. And he wanted to shift all natural gas to vehicles. And it was just this. But you guys, he spent $68 million in an advertising campaign to do it. Okay? We have now seen probably $10 million spent on trying to educate folks on fracking. And some of that information gets out there, some of it's understood. We actually felt a groundswell of approval in terms of opposing Polis's ballot initiative the last month and a half. I really wish that settlement had not come. I wish he'd gotten into the ballot, and I wish we could have battled another 2.5 months, but I'm a fighter. It's very difficult to answer your question because we have, and I love this, our trade groups are an independent association of oil and gas companies. Independent association is an oxymoron. You should see some of our board meetings screaming at one another about policy, and everybody has their own lobbyist, their own opinion, their own expert in terms of what's to be done. You'll have a group break off and form, and I love it, the American Natural Gas Alliance, ANGA. You have a group peel off and form CRED. I love it, okay? But it's very difficult to come out with one message. And the message that I've been pushing for 10 years is think of the impact on the low-income household. Are you doing the best thing in your decisions as a politician or a company to make sure that Mrs. Harpole can afford that utility bill? You know, so much of the environmental movement is about emotion. What's more emotional about affordable energy? And then what's more emotional than conveying that in a geopolitical fashion to other countries so the Ukrainians don't freeze to death, so they have optionality in terms of who their supplier might be? So again, that's my opinion. Other folks think it's more important to talk about other things. If we had one individual that wanted to spend $50 million on an ad campaign, he'd probably be our leader. but you're talking about an independent association that I think is an oxymoron.
Why don't we take one last question?
Two major growth areas in the industry are gas and liquids technologies that we can use to create a more vertically integrated business model for the United States, and then LNG imports into Central and Eastern Europe, like you just mentioned, where there exists no infrastructure or pipeline infrastructure to get it. Of those two, I mean, how do you pick, and what do you think is going to be required in the near term to get the gas into Ukraine and the other countries? And also, what do you think the global will is here to make nice value-added chemicals out of those materials?
I have clients that you guys in the last, so my little tiny 5-person Littleton-based brokerage and analytical company has worked for 4 international ammonia, urea, nitrogen, or fertilizer plants in the last 2 years, trying to help them site facilities. One of those facilities was done by Incitec Pivot Limited out of Australia, Dyna Nobel. They make ammonium nitrate to blow things up, to blow up hillsides so you can harvest coal. $1.4 billion plant down in Louisiana to convert natural gas. 90% of ammonia is natural gas, so natural gas is a feedstock for so many of these projects. We have right now, just in the area from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, along the Mississippi River, $78 billion of new chemical plants being constructed. I'm not 7.8, 78 to $80 billion of facilities going up because of our natural gas prowess. But more importantly, some of these companies, like Australia, a company I had from the Middle East, say because of our rule of law. So naturally, we want to convert as much of this natural gas into other products and export it. But again, I don't want to be the guy in charge of deciding, okay, you take that over and turn it into ammonium nitrate, and then now you can go move that to Eastern Europe. I want the free market to make those decisions. One of the biggest wild cards we have in the 5 areas of potential demand is liquefied natural gas exports. And so for 2 years, I helped this ammonia nitrate plant go in. It's going to consume 100,000 MMBTU per day. Okay? That LNG export facility that Cheniere is building down there will move 3 million MMBTU per day. 30 times that. So I think all of those solutions are critical. Now, one thing you pointed out too, we're very spoiled here in the U.S. We have a gas analysis standard you have to meet when you deliver natural gas to a pipeline. In Europe, there's no equivalent gas analysis. You may have really wet gas laden with propanes, ethanes, natural gas liquids in one part of the country, and very dry gas in another part of, as a country, and part of Europe. So the interconnectivity in Europe isn't what we enjoy here. And that's what's going to create some of the problem in moving Western European gas that may have come in via LNG back into the Ukraine. Have you ever heard of the, I'm not going to be able to come up with the term right now. Your ranges here for pilot lights and your gas burner tip ranges are set at a certain orifice plate that allows natural gas to come out. You cannot move a gas range from Denver over to the West Slope and not have that adjusted. That's how refined our system is here. We have quality standards where you can't have more than 2% CO2 in a stream of natural gas. We don't have to worry about mercury, thankfully, but there's a lot of integration that's going to have to happen over in Europe before we see the kind of the breakthrough. But we're sitting on the reserves. And so 2 countries in Western Europe have banned fracking. Big surprise, France and Belgium. Guess who supported monetarily the opposition to fracking in France? Gazprom. So, you guys have been, I mean, a great audience, great questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. As each speaker gets up, I like to garner a few golden nuggets that they've said, and so I'd like to share a few that really stood out to me in John's talk. Entrepreneurship, drive, and private property ownership and rights. They make all the difference. There's a wonderful book out there, if you haven't read it, called The Mystery of Capital by Hernando de Soto. He's a Peruvian economist, and he looks at the world and he looks at different economies. And he says, why are certain economies doing better than others? And he boils it down to private property ownership and rights. See, that's a novel concept. When you look at history, individuals like you and I being able to own land, being able to own minerals, and to make it productive, that's not commonplace, and it reaps wonderful rewards. It's far better for the millions of decisions to occur in the free market than within a handful of men. Let that one sink in for a little while. Where do you want your decisions being made? Within a handful of people that may or may not know you, may or may not even care about you or have your best interests at heart. You could not have found a better place for natural gas in this country than where it naturally is. I think I put in the naturally is. Hope you're okay with that. Yeah, you should. I like it. I have family members in upstate New York, and recently there was an article contrasting New York and Pennsylvania. New York is in a devastating situation economically right now. Why do you think they're offering 10-year tax incentives, right? No free taxes for 10 years. It's not because their economy is doing all that well, because they're a little bit desperate. Right across the border in Pennsylvania, they're creating hundreds of jobs, and the economy is doing extremely well. Just compare two states, only divided by a line, an arbitrary line. And then his final one, which I really love, ask questions. Regardless if you're under 30, just ask questions, good, honest questions. And you know what I would add to that? After you ask the question, listen to the answers, and then make an informed decision. One of the things that I love about the Opportunity Coalition is that there's a little bit of contrast between our speakers. For those of you that were here last time, we had Richard Franklin, the father of our U.S. Olympian in Colorado, Missy Franklin, and also one of the founders of the Clean Tech Open. Wonderful man. He would have some contrasting opinions about fossil fuels and the environment than our speaker tonight. But each of them share a common thread, and that is that opportunity and freedom for people make a positive difference. It's all people want is a chance for the government to get out of the way, for them to go achieve their dreams. Our next speaker in September is Josh Stewart. He's the founder and CEO of XJet. It'll be fascinating to learn about their growth throughout the world. And in October, we're going to have President Bruce Benson from the University of Colorado come and speak with us as well. We encourage you to share the Opportunity Coalition events with your friends. If you have any speakers that you think that we should bring in, we'd be honored to have them. And again, thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.